Hello everyone, welcome back to the YouTube channel. Today, we're going to dive into a detailed comparison of three fighter aircraft, the US-developed Northrop F-20 Tigershark, F-20, China's Chengdu J-20 Mighty Dragon, J-20, and Russia's Sukhoi Su-75 Checkmate, Su-75. We'll look at their development histories, capabilities, intended roles, and how they compare to each other, especially from an American audience perspective. Let's get started. We'll begin with the F-20. The Northrop F-20 Tigershark was a US project initiated in the 1970s and first flown in 1982. Wikipedia. It was derived from the earlier F-5 series, which many US allies used, and was meant to offer high performance at relatively low cost, particularly for export customers. National Security Journal. It featured a single General Electric F404 turbofan engine, replacing the twin J-85s of the earlier F-5, giving significantly improved thrust and performance. Wikipedia. The avionics were modern for the time, and it was capable of engaging beyond visual range air-to-air missiles, something the F-5 lacked. Nachukigert.org. However, despite its promise, the F-20 never entered full production or operational service. It remained a prototype. Only 3 were built, and the program was cancelled in 1986. Wikipedia. From a US audience standpoint, the F-20 stands as an example of a very capable aircraft that ultimately failed to find a market or US service adoption, overshadowed by other platforms like the F-16. Now let's talk about the J-20, the Chengdu J-20. Mighty Dragon is China's first domestically developed 5th-generation stealth fighter, made by Chengdu Aircraft Corporation for the People's Liberation Army Air Force, PLAAF. Wikipedia. It first flew in 2011 and was officially introduced into service around 2017. Wikipedia. The J-20 features a twin-engine layout, canards, forward small winglets, combined with a delta wing, a stealthy airframe with a chined forebody, diverterless supersonic inlets, DSI, internal weapons bays and radar-absorbent coatings. Wikipedia. Analysts estimate its radar cross-section may be between 0.02 to 0.1 square meters under certain conditions, putting it ahead of the Russian Su-57 in stealth terms. National Security Journal. It is designed for air superiority missions, long-range strike, and to field internal long-range air-to-air missiles, enabling beyond visual range engagements. Eurasian Times. For an American audience, the J-20 represents one of the key ways in which China is challenging US air dominance, developing its own stealth fighter and seeking to field it in quantity. Third, the Su-75. The Sukhoi Su-75 Checkmate is a newer Russian design unveiled in 2021 as a single-engine stealth fighter intended primarily for the export market. Wikipedia. It incorporates features such as diverterless supersonic inlets, DSI, a V-tail configuration, which combines the role of vertical tails and horizontal elevators into rudder elevators or ruddervators. Internal weapons bays, and a payload capacity up to roughly 7,400 kilo, with range stated up to 3,000 kilometers in some disclosures. Wikipedia. Key to note. As of late 2025, the Su-75 has not entered operational service and remains in prototype or pre-series status. National Security Journal. It is being pitched as a lower-cost alternative to other 5th-gen fighters. From a US viewer's perspective, the Su-75 may represent a competitor in the export market, though with caveats around its readiness and production maturity. Let's compare these three across a number of dimensions. Development status, stealth air superiority capability, weapon load and role, cost, market, and overall fit. Development status. The F-20 was fully developed but never adopted or mass-produced. The J-20 is operational and in service, production ongoing. The Su-75 is still in development or early prototyping marketing phase, not yet fully fielded. So in terms of maturity, the J-20 leads stealth and air superiority capability. The J-20's stealth is touted as advanced, with ample internal bays and modern shaping. Su-75 claims stealth features, but since it is unproven, its real performance is uncertain. The F-20 lacks stealth by modern standards. It was developed in a generation before stealth became a primary attribute. So while the F-20 is nimble and capable, it would be outclassed in a modern stealth context. For example, one analysis observed the J-20 outclasses the Su-57, and by extension many Russian designs, in stealth. In 1945, the Su-75 has designs to reduce radar signature, but again, proof in operational service is limited. Wikipedia. For a US audience, the J-20 represents a serious stealth threat. The Su-75, a potential but unproven one. And the F-20, a legacy design that wouldn't match modern stealth platforms. Weapon load, range and roll. The J-20 is designed for long-range engagements, equipped with large internal bays capable of carrying long-range air-to-air missiles, and has considerable range, fuel capacity to reach distant targets. Wikipedia. The Su-75 is marketed with a decent payload and range for a single-engine fighter. Some claims up to 7,400 km payload and 3,000 km range. Wikipedia. The F-20, being a light fighter, was optimized for cost-effectiveness and export markets, not super-range stealth missions. Thus, its load and range are more modest. Chuckyeager.org. Thus, in terms of strike and long-reach capability, the J-20 has an advantage. The Su-75 could fill a niche for lighter export stealth fighters, while the F-20 was more for affordable air defense, air superiority in its era, cost and market. The F-20 was marketed as being affordable, easy to maintain, and meant for US allies. However, US policy changes meant it lost its export market and was cancelled. National Security Journal. The Su-75 is explicitly pitched as a low-cost alternative to more expensive fighters like the F-35 or the Chinese stealth fighters. For some reports priced at 25 to 30 million per unit for export offers. The national interest. The J-20 is a cutting-edge asset, so not simply evaluated by low cost, but by capability and quantity. For the US audience, the US doesn't want to underestimate export fighters like Su-75 or J-20 that could saturate adversary air forces or ally nations in the future. Overall fit. The F-20 is an interesting what-if in US aviation history, a capable aircraft that might have been more significant had circumstances been different. The J-20 is actively relevant as China's stealth frontline fighter. The Su-75 is something to watch for the future, but not yet at operational levels. If you are assessing which is the strongest at this moment, the J-20 is clearly ahead of the other two in modern operational context. The Su-75 may catch up, depending on development and production. The F-20 is essentially obsolete for modern stealth warfighting. To wrap up, for an American audience interested in air power dynamics, it's critical to note that while the US has long held air superiority with platforms like the F-22, the emergence of aircraft like the J-20 represents a shift. The Su-75 may represent a more accessible stealth fighter for nations outside the US sphere of influence. Meanwhile, the F-20 highlights how even promising US programs can stall if policy and market don't align. So if tomorrow's war involves stealth, sensor fusion, long-range missiles and networked combat, then aircraft like the J-20 are directly relevant to US strategy and defense planning. That's the deep dive on F-20 versus J-20 versus Su-75. If you'd like, they can pull up a spec sheet comparison table with numbers, speed, thrust, radar, weapons for you. Or discuss how these compare to US fighters like the F-35 or F-22. Let me know.